It tunes the sharpest color picture at the flick of a finger.
Meer sound, meer feeling.
You really feel the music with the Sony Walkman.
Do you ever feel that jolt of instant recognition when something from the 1980s suddenly reappears? Childhood then meant freedom, scraped knees, and ice pops that stained your tongue. But if it all mattered so much, why does it feel like another lifetime now? There was no science behind it, but we believed. If your Nintendo game glitched, froze, or refused to load, you knew exactly what to do. Take out the cartridge, turn it over, and blow a magic gust of breath across the bottom. Not just once, not too soft, not too hard. The perfect blast took practice. You slid it back in, pressed power, and waited to see if the screen turned black or if Mario finally showed up. That ritual was part of the gameplay. Sometimes you blew into it 3, 4, even 5 times. You tapped the side. You jiggled it in the slot like a combination lock. And if it finally worked, it felt like winning the lottery. Not because of luck, but because you fixed it with breath. You would pass cartridges around like sacred relics, Duck Hunt, Contra, Mega Man, each one requiring a little whisper of air and a lot of hope. Friends had their own techniques. Some believed in blowing into the console, not the game. Others swore by the double blow and tap method. Nobody really knew why it helped, but everyone did it. Today's games auto-update, load instantly, and never need your spit. But back then, every game had a ritual. You were not just a player, you were the technician. And somehow it always felt like you earned it. This was the most sacred tradition of the 1980s childhood. Wake up before your parents, drag your blanket to the living room, and pour yourself a bowl of cereal the size of your head. The cereal was never measured. It was all crunch, all sugar, and the milk turned neon by the second spoonful. And on the screen, pure happiness. He-Man, the Smurfs, Looney Tunes. You watched for hours, one cartoon after another, all back-to-back like the universe had planned this just for you. No commercials for things adults liked, just toys, games, and more cereal. You leaned in with a spoon in one hand and your chin on the arm of the couch, hypnotized by animation and marshmallows. You knew the lineup by heart. You mourned when it was over at noon and golf took its place. No one talked to you. No one asked for chores. This was your time. The rest of the weekend could be chaos, but this stretch of Saturday morning was sacred. You laughed at jokes you barely understood. You memorized theme songs that still pop into your head. You spilled milk, refilled your bowl, and shouted when your favorite show came on. No streaming, no pause, no rewinding. You were just there, present, sugared up, and completely content. Every phone had a cord, and every cord turned into a snake. You would stretch it across rooms, around corners, through doorways, wherever you needed to go to get some privacy. Usually the kitchen. Usually while everyone else in the house needed to be there too. You twisted the cord around your finger, around your wrist, around itself. By the end of the call, it looked like a plastic slinky that had seen war. You got wrapped up in it like it was part of your outfit, and if you had siblings, they would yell at you for stretching it so far the base lifted off the wall. But you kept talking, pacing in circles like you were solving world peace. That phone cord was the conversation. You talked about nothing and everything. Homework, crushes, TV shows. Your feet went numb from standing too long. You leaned against counters, lay on the floor, or sat cross-legged in weird corners of the kitchen just to stay connected. When someone picked up the other phone, it was betrayal. When your mom shouted, "Time to hang up!" it felt like a tragedy. Now phones fit in pockets. But back then, they wrapped around you, and so did the memories. It was the original playlist. You waited by the stereo, finger on the record button, just hoping the DJ would not talk over the intro. If they did, you were furious, but you still kept the recording. Because getting your favorite song on tape? That was everything. You labeled each cassette in your own handwriting. Sometimes you drew little stars or smiley faces next to the really good songs. You always tried to pause between tracks so you did not waste tape. If someone walked into the room and made noise during the recording, you glared at them like they had ruined your life. And every mixtape felt personal, like a sonic scrapbook. The pause, play, stop routine was your rhythm. You learned to predict the DJ's voice. You celebrated when the song faded out clean. It was not just music, it was timing, luck, and a little bit of obsession. You made tapes for friends, for road trips, for your Walkman. Some got eaten by the player, some got dubbed over. But the ones that survived, they still live in a drawer somewhere, right next to all those half-used AA batteries. Your first music collection was not bought, it was captured. Your lunch was not just a meal, it was a statement. Metal lunchboxes lined the shelves of every store, covered in the faces of superheroes, cartoon characters, and whatever TV show you loved most. You picked yours carefully. You carried it proudly. And if it had a matching thermos inside, you were unstoppable. He-Man, Strawberry Shortcake, the A-Team. Every kid knew who had the cool lunchbox, and every kid who had one slammed it on the lunch table with confidence. The thermos lid doubled as a cup. The inside always smelled faintly of soup and peanut butter. And when it dented, you wore it like a badge of honor. Your lunchbox held more than food. It held secrets, notes from home, trading cards, sometimes a little folded napkin with your name on it. The latch always bent, the paint always chipped, but you never gave it up until the corners rusted through. Plastic lunchboxes came later, but they never had the weight or the soul of the metal ones. That clink of metal in the hallway, you still hear it. You were supposed to be learning, but really, you were trying to survive. The green screen flickered, the keyboard clicked, and the first time you saw the words, "You have died of dysentery," you laughed, even if you had no idea what that meant. It was not just a game, it was a classroom event. You named your party after friends and hoped they would not break a leg crossing the river. You debated buying more oxen or more bullets. You hunted with that pixelated rifle that never aimed quite right. And when someone got cholera, you pressed on like a fearless pioneer. Or you gave up and restarted because you had to reach Oregon. The graphics were blocks, the font was ancient, the experience was unforgettable. You did not care if it was educational. You cared about getting to the end, even if it took 2 recesses and all of computer lab. Today's games have graphics so real you can see sweat, but nothing compares to watching your friend Jimmy get snake bit while trying to ford a river. You learned strategy, grit, and that wagon wheels were pure evil. And honestly, you would still play it right now. There was a sound to it, like a soft pop and clunk mixed into one. The clicky channel dial was how you watched TV, and it was how you controlled the house. Turn the knob, wait for static to clear, hope you landed on the right show. You always went past the channel you wanted, then turned back one. Some dials were smooth, others stuck like they had gum behind them. And if the knob broke off, which it always did, you grabbed a pair of pliers and kept going. Because the show must go on, literally. You learned which channels were fuzzy, which ones came in at certain times, and how to smack the side of the set just right to fix the picture. The dial made watching TV feel physical. You worked for it. You clicked for it. Remote controls were rare. If you were the youngest, you were the remote. That pop-clunk sound, still stuck in your ears, and probably always will be. You were not just a passenger. You were part of the entertainment. The way-back seat in a station wagon faced backwards, giving you a full view of every car behind you and turning every red light into a staring contest. You made faces. You waved. You sometimes held up notes written on napkins just to mess with strangers. It was a ride and a performance. The seatbelts were questionable. The legroom was worse. But it was your space, far from parents, close to siblings, and full of adventure. You tried to count how many cars you could get to wave back. And when someone made a face back, you won. You watched headlights get smaller in the distance. You turned grocery store trips into spy missions. You sat back there with your Walkman and your imagination. And if the car hit a bump, you felt it first. There are no way-back seats anymore, no secret rear-view playgrounds. But every time you see a vintage wagon, you remember what it was like to ride facing the world. This was how you texted in the 1980s, with folded paper, sneaky glances, and silent handoffs. You wrote the note during math class. You folded it into a tight triangle, tucking in the corners like origami with secrets. Then you passed it to your friend with a nod and a plan. It was risky, but it was worth it. The best notes had boxes to check. Do you like me? Yes. Number maybe. Others had gossip, inside jokes, or doodles of your teacher with devil horns. If the teacher caught you, that was classroom death. But if you pulled it off, you were a legend. You passed them backwards, forwards, under desks, and through books. Some had code names, some got intercepted. But the moment of opening one, carefully peeling back the folded paper, was electric. It was not just communication, it was connection. And sometimes those notes stayed folded in a shoebox long after the year ended. There was no easy way to do it. You squeezed the silver pouch, aimed the plastic straw, and prayed you hit the right spot. Too soft, and it bent. Too hard, and it went through the back. But when you nailed it, perfection. That cold, sweet juice hit different. Sometimes the straw cracked before it pierced the foil, and you had to chew the end into a weapon. Other times, you made a pinhole leak and ended up with sticky hands for the rest of the day. But once you got that straw in, you were golden. You slurped it like victory, and flattened the pouch when you were done like it owed you something. Capri Sun was not just a drink, it was a challenge. You brought it to soccer games, field trips, birthday parties. It sat at the bottom of lunch bags, always a little warm, always still perfect. Now they make the pouches easier to open. But where is the fun in that? Back then, you earned every sip. They looked adorable, clear or candy-colored plastic with sparkles embedded like fairy dust. But once you put them on, jelly shoes became tiny foot saunas. You would slide your bare feet in, and within 5 minutes they were sticky, slippery, and somehow always squeaky. They had little holes for ventilation, but they did nothing. Your feet sweated like they were in a Ziploc bag. Still, you wore them every day. The plastic rubbed weird. Your heels got blisters. Your toes left imprints. But you loved them. Because jelly shoes were cool. And if you had the glitter kind, you were unstoppable. You matched them to outfits. You wore them to school, to birthday parties, to the grocery store. They smelled like rubber and regret. But no one cared. You could buy them in drugstores or grocery stores, usually hanging from plastic hooks. They were cheap. They were flimsy. They were iconic. You might have lost a few pairs to melted driveways or squished playgrounds. But you never forgot how magical they made you feel for 5 minutes before the sweat started. They were a rite of passage, fashion over function, style over comfort. And honestly, you would still try on a pair if you saw them in your size. A sticker chart on the wall, your name on a row. One good day and bam, you got a sticker. But not just any sticker, a scratch and sniff sticker. The kind you pressed your nail into like it was a treasure chest and then inhaled like your life depended on it. The smell was the prize. Some were amazing. Cherry, root beer, grape, bubble gum. Others were experiments, like popcorn, dirt, pickles, or a strange pizza scent that somehow ruined pizza. But you still wanted them. You still begged for them, because they were proof that you did something right. Teachers kept them locked away in special drawers. The good ones were reserved for big wins, aces on spelling tests, helping with the projector, being quiet during fire drills. You could tell which stickers were rare by how fast they disappeared. You knew the exact smell of the banana one before it even left the drawer. You made little trades during recess like you were running a sticker stock market. Some kids hoarded them. Others wore them on their shirts all day like badges of honor. You collected them on folders. You traded them during recess. Some kids had albums filled with hundreds. They were currency. They were motivation. They were weirdly powerful. Today's rewards are digital. Back then, all it took was a piece of scented paper and a good scratch to feel like you mattered. You still remember that root beer one, don't you? That rip sound? It was the official bell of the school day. Trapper keepers were loud, bold, and utterly satisfying to open. That Velcro flap made every head turn in class. And when you snapped it shut, it echoed down the hallway like a zipper made of thunder. You were organized. Kind of. Inside, everything was chaos. Loose paper, pens with chewed caps, stickers on dividers. But on the outside, You looked like you had it together. You had a neon cover or one with a dolphin jumping into a sunset. And if you had a matching pencil case, you were a legend. It made you feel grown up, like a little office worker with color-coded tabs. You doodled inside it during math. You scribbled your crush's name on the folder tab and hoped no one saw. You opened it slowly to make the rip last longer. And when the flap wore out, you used a rubber band because no way were you giving it up. Some teachers loved them, others banned them. They took up too much desk space. But you fought for yours. You slid your Trapper Keeper across the desk like it was a briefcase full of secrets. Every rip of that flap meant something. You were here. You were ready. You might not have done your homework, but your folders were together. Today's kids tap tablets. You had Velcro, and it was glorious. They were gross. They were weird. They were everything your parents hated, and that made them even better. Garbage Pail Kids had snot, pus, bad breath, exploding heads, and puns so awful they became art. You clipped them to your Trapper Keeper, stuck them in your locker, and traded them like currency. Every kid had a favorite. You laughed too hard at Atom Bomb. You cringed at Leaky Lindsay. You wondered who made these cards and why they were allowed near children. But you kept flipping through the stack, looking for a rare one, or at least one that made your friends gag. That was the goal. The grosser, the better. They were banned, confiscated, torn in half by teachers, and still, you brought them to school. You stuck them in the back of your math book and hoped no one noticed. You traded doubles like baseball cards, only more disgusting. Some of them smelled weird, like gum wrappers from another universe. And if you got a brand new pack, that was power. Some schools banned them. Some teachers confiscated entire collections. But that only made them more legendary. You kept them in shoe boxes under your bed. You memorized series numbers. You peeled the backs too soon. And you still regret trading your best one for two you cannot even remember. Today's trading cards are glossy and serious. Garbage Pail Kids were none of that. They were stupid and perfect. You learned how to braid, knot, and count, not for school, but for friendship. A pile of embroidery floss meant a weekend project and a chance to show someone you cared. You picked their favorite colors, you wrapped it around your clipboard or your big toe, and you knotted away for hours. It was not just string, it was a promise. Each knot was like a heartbeat, each row a memory. You gave one to your best friend, your crush, your camp buddy. Sometimes they fell apart after a week, sometimes they lasted all summer, but they always meant something. You made them in secret and surprised people with them on Mondays. You wore 6 at a time and refused to take them off, even in the pool. You felt like every color choice said something about your friendship. You cried when one broke in gym class. And if someone tied one on your wrist and said, "Don't take it off until it falls off," you took that seriously. You traded them at school. You made matching ones in secret. You got one from someone you barely knew, and suddenly they were part of your life. Friendship bracelets were not fancy. They were not expensive. But they were real. They left little tan lines on your wrist. And if someone still wore yours weeks later, you felt 10 feet tall. No app will ever replace that. The food was fine, the box was better. But let's be honest, the toy was everything. You got that Happy Meal in your hands, peeled it open, and dug for the plastic treasure buried under your fries. Maybe it was a tiny figurine. Maybe it was a wind-up car. Maybe it broke before you got home. Did not matter. You still loved it. The toys were simple, maybe even cheap, but they had power. They made you feel special, like this box was made just for you. You showed it off at school, you compared it with your friends, you even tried to collect them all, like a fast food Pokemon trainer. You saved the best ones on your dresser like trophies. You lost the smallest ones in the couch cushions. You used your allowance to beg for another trip to McDonald's just for the toy. You kept the box longer than the burger. And when the toy was part of a movie tie-in, you felt like you were holding Hollywood in your hand. Some came in sets, some were themed, some were just random. But you always remembered the thrill of lifting that cardboard flap and seeing what was inside. The food was gone in minutes, The toy lived in your backpack for weeks, and every new Happy Meal felt like Christmas. Even now, you would check the box just to see. It was not just a television. It was furniture. The kind that weighed more than your dad's toolbox and had fake wood grain panels that made it feel like a sideboard with a screen. You sat on the floor, just a few feet away, because the screen was small and the picture was blurry. And that was normal. You leaned in, squinting through static and shadows, your knees tucked under you. Your elbows rested on the carpet. You became part of the television. You could hear the faint buzz of electricity and feel the static if you got too close. And when someone turned the knob, you could smell the dust inside the screen heating up. You were so close, your forehead would sometimes touch the glass. You would leave little smudges and get yelled at later, but it was worth it. That warm glow on your face felt like a fireplace made of cartoons and sitcoms. Sometimes you dozed off during a movie, chin on your fists, eyes still flickering with light. And if someone walked in front of you, instant outrage. They were blocking your entire universe. The knobs were always stiff, the channels were always fuzzy, but you stayed planted right there, staring up like it was a campfire. You did not have a remote. You were the remote. And that cabinet television? It is probably still in your grandparents' house, working just fine. You waited until it got dark. You cracked the plastic tube gently, feeling that little pop, then shook it like you were casting a spell. And just like that, it glowed. Bright green, radioactive yellow, sometimes a wild pink, like a tiny piece of magic wrapped around your wrist. And everyone had one. You waved it around like a lightsaber. You bent it into shapes. You made crowns, necklaces, rings, and occasionally just stared at it for way too long. The glow faded slowly overnight, and you kept it next to your bed like a nightlight. And even when it stopped glowing, you still wore it, for the vibes. You showed it off like it was real jewelry. You felt cool in the dark, like your arm was made of starlight. You danced with it, posed for pictures with it, and cracked a second one if the first lost its shine. Parties were not official until someone started handing them out. And if you got one in your goodie bag, that party became legendary. Glow sticks meant something fun had happened. A party, a sleepover, a school dance. They turned a regular night into something special. And they made you feel like you were glowing too. Even now, if someone hands you one, you crack it without hesitation. Because you remember. The teacher wheeled it in like a knight unveiling a sacred relic. The overhead projector, with its buzzing fan and glass surface, was about to light up the white screen like a mini-movie. The plastic transparency sheets were loaded on top, and the whole room suddenly got quiet. It was showtime. You watched the teacher write with a squeaky marker, backward, upside down, and somehow still legible. You stared at their shadowy hand as it hovered on the screen like a weather forecast. You laughed when the transparency fell off or got smudged. And when the bulb blew out, it was chaos. You just sat there hoping class was over. The whole room turned into a warm, dim cinema. You zoned out watching the layers of notes stack up on the screen. You saw your teacher's hand twitch mid-sentence and prayed they were not about to erase everything by accident. You secretly wanted to be the one to write on it just once. And if the teacher let a student do the honors, that was royalty for the day. You took notes fast, trying to keep up. Sometimes you just copied the entire screen. Sometimes you doodled in the margins. It was not digital. It was not high-tech. But that buzzing glass box turned math, science, and even grammar into a visual experience you still remember. Even the smell of those markers is still in your nose. The crust was too thick. The cheese was too thin. The pepperoni? Sometimes a single slice. But when it was pizza day in the cafeteria, nobody cared. You rushed to the lunch line, grabbed your tray, and hoped the slices were still warm. It was not round. It was rectangular. The edges were dry, the center was soggy, but that perfect corner piece, pure cafeteria gold. You folded it like New York style, even though it cracked down the middle. And if you were lucky, you got 2 slices, just enough to call it a real meal. You knew it was pizza day just by the smell wafting through the hallways before lunch. Kids talked about it all morning like it was a national holiday. You ate it faster than any other meal on your tray, and somehow it still managed to be greasy and dry at the same time. No one cared. It was still the best day of the week. You paired it with a carton of chocolate milk and maybe a fruit cup you never touched. You sat with your friends, tore off bites while talking, and laughed with a mouthful of pizza that definitely came from a freezer. No one called it gourmet, but it was yours. And nothing said Friday like square slices and loud lunch tables. It was not just a catalog, it was a book of dreams. Thick as a phone book and glossy from cover to cover, the Sears Christmas Wish Book arrived like a holiday miracle. You flipped past the clothes and the boring adult stuff until you hit the toy section, and suddenly, time stopped. Pages and pages of shiny, new toys that you had never seen in person but somehow needed with your whole soul. You circled things in pen, starred them, dog-eared the corners. You made lists that were longer than your arm. You ranked toys by importance. Must have, really want, okay if it's on sale. You tried to act casual while leaving it open to the exact page your parents needed to see. And if you had a sibling, you fought over who got to hold the catalog first. You dreamed about the toys at night. You made your wish list as specific as a legal document. You stared at pictures of train sets, dollhouses, and racetracks like you were studying blueprints. You knew the prices by heart, and you secretly hoped your parents had already ordered it. Because waiting was half the magic. There was no internet, no Amazon. This was the only portal you had to what might show up under the tree. You stared at Power Wheels, Barbie dream houses, remote control cars, and action figures you did not even understand, but had to have. It was not about getting everything. It was about imagining everything. You could sit with that catalog for hours, stretching the possibilities in your mind. The toys never broke, never needed batteries, never disappointed, because they were perfect on the page. And even now, if you saw one today, you would turn to the toy section first. Out of instinct, out of memory, out of love. Printing used to mean noise. Loud, screeching, grinding noise. The dot matrix printer clicked away like a tiny industrial machine, pulling long sheets of paper with holes along the sides, inch by inch, line by line. You stood there, watching it feed out of the printer like a magic scroll. Your report, your banner, your family's flight itinerary in glorious, pixelated letters. Then came the best part, ripping it. You carefully tore the sheets apart along the perforation. Then you peeled off the hole-punched edges in one smooth motion, like peeling plastic off a new phone screen. You tried to do it cleanly without tearing the print, and when you nailed it, perfection. The stack of leftover side strips became toys. You made paper chains, confetti, or tiny pretend receipts. The whole process felt official, like you had just completed something important. Sometimes the ink was faded, sometimes it smudged, but you kept going. You folded reports like maps. You stapled essays with pride. And the sound of that printer chugging along, that was the soundtrack of productivity. Now, printing is silent and instant. But back then, it was an experience. The paper was connected, the work was tactile, and you felt like you were part of something physical. And the tear, that rip, that was satisfaction. There was something oddly satisfying about it, that long bead chain hanging from the ceiling fan like a golden invitation. You stood on your tiptoes, stretched your arm, and gave it a pull, expecting one thing to happen and always triggering the wrong one. You wanted the light on, but the fan started spinning. You wanted the fan, but the light flicked off. It became a guessing game. Click. Nothing. Click again. Wind. Click again. Darkness. And sometimes you pulled it too hard and the whole thing jammed. Then you had to call Dad, who pulled out the ladder and sighed dramatically like you had just broken the law. But when it worked, magic. The fan spun to life like a spaceship. The light glowed just right. You smiled like you had figured out a secret. The chain itself had its own presence, maybe a crystal bauble, maybe a little ball or a charm that made it easier to grab. It clicked softly when pulled, swinging gently like a pendulum of control. You pulled it when you were bored. You pulled it just to see what it would do. It was your first taste of home mechanics, and even if you got it wrong most of the time, you kept pulling. because eventually you would get it right. You held it in your hand, a thin plastic tube that looked plain at first, but then snap. You bent it just enough to feel the crack inside, shook it like a snow globe, and watched the glow spread like magic. Suddenly, it was alive, bright green, electric yellow, or nuclear pink. You had just made light with your hands. You were unstoppable. You wore it proudly around your wrist like a badge. You connected them into necklaces. You traded colors with friends. And when the lights dimmed at the party, everyone turned into glowing silhouettes running through the backyard like fireflies. The glow faded overnight, but you still kept it. You tucked it next to your bed or wore it to school the next day, even though it barely shimmered anymore. It was not about brightness. It was about the moment. The snap felt like a spell. The light felt like joy. You were not thinking about batteries or safety. You were thinking about how cool it was to be a kid with a tiny piece of science wrapped around your arm. And for those few hours, you glowed. Streaming did not exist. Playlists were physical. And if you wanted to watch something, you went to the living room shelf, or maybe a cabinet under the TV, and flipped through a stack of VHS tapes labeled in thick black marker on strips of masking tape. They were handwritten with love. Christmas 1987. Tom and Jerry, do not tap over. Dad's football, Super Bowl, very important. You flicked through like it was a card catalog of memories. Some tapes had 3 or 4 shows on them, fast-forwarded to the good parts. Others had commercials that you refused to skip because they were half the fun. The handwriting was a little smudged. The tape labels peeled at the edges, but it all felt like treasure. You rewound before watching. You had to. That was the rule. You heard the buzz of the VCR and the clicking of the tape settling into place like a lock clicking open. Sometimes you recorded over things by accident. Sometimes you lost the tape altogether. But when you found a favorite, your birthday party, a Disney special, a Saturday morning cartoon block, you watched it like gold. Now everything is on demand. But back then, you made your own library, one tape at a time. And every flick of that Rolodex, a ticket back to childhood. There were no bounce houses, no magicians, no venues booked weeks in advance. Your birthday party was in the living room, or the backyard if the weather was nice. The decorations came from a dollar store or were made by hand the night before. Balloons were rare, streamers were reused. And the cake? Homemade, lopsided, and perfect. It came from a box mix, yellow or chocolate, topped with frosting your mom whipped together using margarine and hope. Your name was written in shaky letters, sometimes misspelled, but it still made you smile. You never knew what a store-bought cake tasted like, but you knew what it felt like to be celebrated. That one day wasn't about what you had, it was about being seen. The guest list was short, just cousins, maybe a neighbor or two. Presents were wrapped in newspaper or last year's birthday bags. Sometimes the gift was a new coat you needed for school or a pair of sneakers you had to grow into. But you still blew out the candles and made a wish. You still felt like the center of the world for that one day. You played games like musical chairs, pin the tail on the donkey, or just ran around outside until someone scraped a knee. There was no budget, but there was joy. Real, messy, homemade joy. The kind that sticks with you longer than a party at a trampoline park ever could. Furniture from thrift stores or curbside finds gave homes that mismatched charm only necessity could create. A sagging couch from someone else's garage sale. A wobbly coffee table rescued from the sidewalk. Chairs with mismatched legs or beds with slats that creaked under every turn. This was what made a living room feel lived in. There was no delivery truck, just a neighbor with a pickup, or a slow push down the block with a dolly borrowed from Uncle Joe. You sprayed it down, you wiped it twice, and you made it yours. Some pieces were covered in throws to hide the rips. Others leaned against the wall to stay upright. But they had character, stories, a past you never asked about. In kitchens, the table might have a burn mark or a dent from years of use, but it still held dinner. In bedrooms, dressers groaned when you pulled the drawers, but they closed eventually. New furniture was for people with money. For everyone else, you took what you could get, and you were thankful for it. Because when money was tight, having something, anything, to sit on was a win. You did not care how it looked. You cared that it worked. The Easy Bake Oven brought the thrill of baking into the tiny hands of children everywhere. Released by Kenner in 1963, it looked like a pastel-colored toy, but worked like real kitchen equipment, albeit powered by a common light bulb. Slide the cake tray in, wait just long enough for anticipation to bubble, and out came a warm, soft treat you made yourself. The cakes were tiny, the brownies a bit dense, but the pride was enormous. For many young kids, especially girls at the time, the Easy Bake Oven was a first taste of independence. No parental supervision needed, no open flames, just you and a cake mix in a miniature pan. It sparked creativity, confidence, and plenty of sibling rivalries over who got the bigger slice. The toy's appeal lasted for decades, but those original models with their sleek retro look and that gentle hum from the light bulb warming up have a special place in memory. Long before kids had screens and apps, this was hands-on, slightly messy, and totally satisfying play. The smell of a baking chocolate chip cake from a 40-watt bulb is not something you easily forget. Mood rings promised to read your soul. Slip one on, and suddenly your finger was a window into your emotions. Or so we thought. The magic came from a tiny, color-changing stone set into a thick metal or plastic band. It shifted hues depending on temperature, but as kids, we believed it told the truth. If it turned blue, you were calm. If it went black, you were angry. Green? Maybe in love. We studied those little charts that came with the ring like they were sacred scrolls. Every recess and sleepover had at least one person interpreting moods. Sure, the science was sketchy, and sure, it mostly just reflected how cold or hot your hands were, but to us, it was real magic. It felt like the ring knew something we did not. Every kid had one, lost one, or begged their parents to buy one from a gas station or gift shop. The band turned your finger green eventually, but you wore it anyway. It was a talisman, a tiny crystal mood detector that let you feel seen, even if it was just a gimmick. To this day, nothing quite compares to the mystery and wonder packed into one shimmering, shifting little stone. Making toys from household items was what you did when store-bought ones were out of reach. Cardboard boxes were race cars, paper towel tubes turned into swords or telescopes, a rubber band and a spoon? Instant catapult. You did not have the latest action figure or dollhouse, but you had couch cushions, and those made a mean fort. You built entire worlds with what was lying around. A milk crate could be a spaceship. A shoebox became a treasure chest. And no one told you how to play, you just figured it out. Sometimes your parents helped, but most of the time, it was you versus boredom. That imagination, born out of necessity, stuck with you. You learned how to be resourceful. You did not need batteries or flashy lights. You needed time, space, and maybe some tape. They brought laughter. They gave you freedom. You did not join the team. You did not sign up for the club. Not because you did not want to, but because you could not. There was a form, a fee, a uniform, a ride. Always something just out of reach. Football pads cost too much. Dance lessons were a joke. Even the art club needed supplies your house did not have. You watched from the sidelines, you clapped at games, you listened to your friends talk about practice and tryouts and trophies. You smiled, you cheered, but you were never in it. After school, you went straight home. Sometimes to babysit, sometimes because there was no one to pick you up. The locker rooms, the backstage, the huddles and uniforms, they were like a secret world that never had space for you. Poor in the 1980s meant more than missing meals. It meant missing moments. No yearbook photos and jerseys, no ribbons or trophies gathering dust on your shelf. Just memories of what you almost had, and questions about who you might have been if the price tag had not gotten in the way. Minimal holiday decorations did not mean less spirit, just fewer lights. No inflatable snowmen, no blinking rooftop displays, maybe a single strand of lights across the front window, half of them flickering. Maybe a tree with sparse branches and mismatched ornaments, paper stars, popcorn strings, hand-painted bulbs that chipped year after year. You reused wrapping paper, saved bows in a kitchen drawer. Stockings were sometimes just socks. The gifts were few but thoughtful. A scarf someone knitted, a book from a yard sale, a secondhand toy wrapped with care. The meals were simple. Maybe a turkey, maybe just a roast chicken with canned corn and mashed potatoes. But there was laughter, there was warmth, there was effort. Other houses looked like magazine covers. Yours looked like a family doing its best. And somehow that made it feel more real, more honest. The magic came not from extravagance, but from intention. You learned that holidays were not about perfection. They were about showing up with what you had and making it matter. And even now, when you see a tree decorated with plastic snowflakes and faded tinsel, something inside you smiles, because that was enough. And in your memory, it still shines. PopTarts were the answer to a morning dream. Breakfast that popped out of the toaster, ready in minutes, no dishes required. When Kellogg's introduced them in 1964, they were a marvel of modern convenience. Frosted or unfrosted rectangles filled with fruit, or what tasted like fruit, wrapped in pastry, packed in foil, and ready to heat. They hit shelves just as the pace of American life was speeding up. Moms needed fast. Kids wanted sweet. PopTarts delivered both. Whether it was strawberry, brown sugar cinnamon, or wild blueberry, every box felt like a little promise that mornings could be easier. Even cold, straight from the foil, they were a hit in lunchboxes and after-school snacks. No plate? No problem. The smell of a warm Pop-Tart coming out of the toaster was almost as good as the taste. Crispy edge, gooey middle, and just enough frosting to feel like a treat. By the end of the 1960s, Pop-Tarts had become more than a convenience food. They were a cultural touchstone, turning rushed mornings into something fun. And while they've changed flavors and designs over the years, those early Pop-Tarts hold a place in memory like few other foods do. If you remember Clacker Toys, you probably also remember getting smacked in the face. These were two solid acrylic balls connected by a string, meant to be swung up and down until they clacked together above and below your hand. That was the whole toy. No batteries, no screen. Just two hard spheres ready to leave a bruise. And kids loved them. The louder and faster they clacked, the cooler you were. It was a skill to master. Get the rhythm right, and you could keep them going for minutes. Get it wrong, and you got a nasty surprise. Parents hated them. Teachers banned them. Hospitals probably kept a few on hand just to demonstrate what not to do. They were loud, dangerous, and oddly satisfying. For a few wild years, clackers were everywhere, on sidewalks, in classrooms, and hidden under beds when they got taken away. Eventually, safety concerns shut them down, but not before a generation got their fill of noise and near misses. They were outlawed in some places, but that only made them cooler. If you ever got them moving just right, you remember the thrill, and maybe a headache to go with it. They were chaos in toy form, and we would not have had it any other way. Watching Reading Rainbow or Sesame Street on PBS was like having a warm, familiar friend show up every afternoon. If you were home, it was on. If your parents were working or the power was still on by a miracle, the TV glowed with the colors of those shows. No cable? No problem. PBS came through with free, quality programming that made you feel seen. You learned letters and numbers, sure, but you also learned empathy, kindness, imagination. Reading Rainbow made you want to go to the library and lose yourself in a book. Sesame Street made you laugh and taught you things without ever talking down to you. You knew the characters like they were real people. Big Bird, Bert and Ernie, LeVar Burton, they were the kind of comfort you did not know you needed until you were grown. These shows were the quiet heroes of latchkey kids and working-class households. They filled the gap when your parents were too tired to help with homework or too busy putting food on the table. They did not need a subscription, just a working antenna and a little patience. And to this day, the theme songs still hit you right in the chest because they meant safety, stability. a moment where the world slowed down and felt okay. There was a line, and if you were in it, everyone knew what it meant. You had the little colored ticket, the one that got you a tray without cash, or maybe your name was just on a list, quietly marked by the lunch lady with tired eyes and no judgment left. But the other kids noticed, and that kind of notice sticks. A free lunch was supposed to mean relief, and it did, for the parents. It meant one less meal to worry about. But for the kids, it felt like wearing a sign. The food itself was never the point. Chicken nuggets, canned peaches, milk in a little carton, none of it mattered. What mattered was the subtle way poverty announced itself between the lunch tables. Some kids avoided the line altogether. They would rather go hungry than be that kid. Others owned it, laughed it off, acted like it did not bother them. But it did. Because when you are poor in the 1980s, even a sandwich is a symbol. And when lunch becomes a currency for belonging, the free one often costs the most. Hand-me-down clothing told a story stitched in faded colors and stretched out sleeves. In homes where money was tight, new clothes were a luxury reserved for Christmas or growth spurts too dramatic to ignore. Everything else? Hand-me-downs, jeans worn thin at the knees, shirts a size too big, coats that smelled like someone else's winter. You learned to cuff sleeves and roll pant legs. You got good at pretending it was your style all along. Sometimes it came from older siblings, sometimes from cousins or neighbors. There was no shame at home, it was just life. But at school, it was different. Kids noticed. They asked where you got it. Or worse, they recognized it from someone else's closet. You laughed it off, or changed the subject, or just said nothing at all. You knew every patch, every stain, every repair your mom made after dinner. These clothes had been through it, just like you. And maybe they were not fashionable, maybe they sagged or pinched or hung wrong, but they lasted. And for families with more love than money, hand-me-downs were not second best. They were just what came next. And they carried you through, one button at a time. Television commercials in the 1960s were more than just breaks between shows. They were cultural events in miniature. With only a few channels and no fast-forward buttons, families watched together as jingles and catchphrases embedded themselves in the national memory. Plop, plop, fizz, fizz. You already know the rest. These ads had staying power. Cereal mascots danced across the screen. Soap commercials turned kitchens into laboratories. And toy ads? They were irresistible. From Slinky to Mr. Potato Head, kids begged for whatever had just aired during Saturday morning cartoons. Commercials were peppy, earnest, and often downright charming. They starred smiling housewives, enthusiastic children, and baritone narrators who made even laundry detergent sound heroic. These were the years when brands did not just sell products. They sold a lifestyle, a vision of modern convenience and happiness. Parents trusted what they saw. Kids repeated the jingles under their breath. Even decades later, people can still sing along to a tune they heard once before dinner in 1966. Commercials from the 1960s did not just advertise. They became part of family rhythm, part of shared language, and part of what made the television glow a little brighter after each show. Before the sleek inline skates of the 1990s, there were the clunky, lovable roller skates with metal wheels. They strapped over your shoes with thick leather buckles and screeched across every surface like they were mad at the floor. If you skated indoors, you sounded like a marching band. If you braved the sidewalk, every crack was a threat. But none of that mattered. Because once you got going, it was freedom. You were flying, wobbling, yes, but flying. These skates had no padding, no ankle support, and no mercy. But they came with memories, rolling through driveways, circling the garage, racing your siblings until someone wiped out. You remember the sound they made on concrete, the clatter as you tried to stop, the feeling of falling and getting back up anyway. Roller discos made them iconic. Kids and teens glided under colored lights, surrounded by Bee Gees and Donna Summer, feeling cooler than they ever had. You might have never mastered the spin. You probably fell more than you want to admit. But those skates, those metal-wheeled monstrosities, were the soundtrack to a whole chapter of growing up. They were heavy, loud, and impossible to forget. The Sears Catalog dreaming ritual was its own kind of holiday. That thick book showed up in the mail like magic, full of glossy pages and promises. Toys, clothes, electronics, even furniture. Everything you could want, but probably would not get. Still, you looked, you circled, you dreamed. You and your siblings would take turns flipping through the toy section, marking pages with dog-eared corners or scribbled stars. You made lists. You imagined. You believed, just for a little while, that maybe, just maybe, this Christmas would be different. And your parents? They let you dream. Even if they knew that catalog was filled with things they could not afford. They watched you with a quiet kind of hope and heartbreak. Because sometimes they managed to pull off a miracle and get one thing from that book. Just one. Maybe it showed up under the tree. Maybe it didn't. But the ritual itself, the dreaming, the wishing, the pretending, was almost as special as the gift. That catalog was not just a shopping tool, it was a time machine, a window into a better life, a reason to believe that something new might be on the way. And even now, years later, just seeing one brings it all back. The weight of it in your lap, the excitement, the longing. It was not just a catalog, it was hope printed in full color. It was never really milk, not in taste, not in texture. But when the real thing got too expensive, powdered milk became the go-to stand-in. Mixed with water in a pitcher that always looked cloudy, it sat in the fridge like a silent compromise. Kids could tell, they always could, the cereal tasted off. The chocolate syrup never mixed right, and drinking it plain, that was a punishment. But it was cheap. That mattered. When you bought powdered milk, you bought time. Time between paychecks. Time between full-price grocery trips. It had a shelf life longer than most of your optimism. It didn't just stretch your grocery bill, it tested your pride. Every sip reminded you this wasn't what other kids had, but it was what you had to get by. It was the kind of thing you hoped would not run out, but also hoped you would not have to drink. You learned to hide the taste with sugar, with syrup, with hope. Sometimes you would go to a friend's house and drink real milk and realize just how much you were missing. Then you would come home, open the fridge, and stare down that pale, ghostly jug again. Powdered milk did not just stretch $1, it stretched your tolerance. Lightbrite turned a dark room into a glowing gallery. Introduced by Hasbro in 1967, this toy was unlike anything else at the time. It featured a black screen lit from behind and a box of tiny colored pegs, red, green, blue, orange, that you pushed through holes to create luminous designs. You could trace pre-printed templates or freestyle your own masterpiece. A clown's grin, a sailboat at sunset, your own name glowing like a neon sign. The warmth from the light bulb behind the screen gave it a cozy feeling, and the soft glow made your room feel like magic. It was quiet play, patient play, the kind where your tongue stuck out in concentration and the world around you disappeared. Parents loved that it was mess-free. Kids loved that they were in control. Once finished, you sat back in the dark and admired your work, a tiny artist with your own spotlight. Over time, more templates arrived, cartoon characters, animals, seasonal themes. But even with no pattern at all, the effect was the same, a toy that made you feel like a creator. In a world before screens lit up everything, Lightbrite let you light up something of your own, one peg at a time. Playgrounds used to be a little more dangerous, and the metal slide on asphalt was the crown jewel of poor design. In the 1970s, nearly every school or park had one. It stood tall, often 2 stories high, baking in the sun until it could sear the back of your legs. No shade, no padding, just you, gravity, and a prayer. The steps up were made of thin metal bars. The top had no real guardrails, and when you slid down, you hit that black top like a dropped steak. But we lined up for it anyway, over and over. There was something thrilling about the danger. It was a rite of passage, a fast, hot, jolting ride that ended in a dusty scrape or bruised elbow. Teachers watched from afar. Parents shrugged. Kids were expected to bounce back. If you made it to the bottom without a scream, you earned bragging rights. If you got burned, you wore it like a badge. Safety standards have come a long way since then, but so much of that fearless, feral childhood play was tied to moments like these. Today, it is hard to believe we once thought that was normal, but deep down, part of us misses it. Church or charity clothing drives were quiet lifelines that showed up just when families needed them most. You would walk into a community center, or maybe a church basement, and there would be folding tables lined with donated clothes, shirts, shoes, jackets, jeans, all sorted by size if you were lucky. Sometimes there were handwritten signs, sometimes just piles. You would dig through the stacks with your mom or grandma, hoping to find something warm that actually fit. If you found something halfway decent, you held onto it like treasure. It was not just about clothes. It was about dignity, about making it through the winter without freezing, about having something to wear to school that did not scream, "I am struggling." These drives meant someone in your neighborhood cared. They meant someone had your back, even if you did not know who. There were moments where you picked out a dress or a jacket that someone else had outgrown, and somehow it still felt new. Sure, it might smell like a stranger's laundry soap, but you wore it with pride. Maybe it had a patch, or maybe the zipper stuck. But it was yours. And when you outgrew it, you bagged it up and passed it on. Because that was the deal. What helped you once could help someone else next. That was the unspoken rule of growing up poor. You shared what little you had, because that little still meant a lot. You did not sit on the couch. You sat on the plastic on the couch. Every sticky summer day, your thighs would peel off like cheese from a grilled sandwich. The covers squeaked, creaked, and groaned with every movement. It was not just a furniture choice, it was a financial strategy. That couch had to last. You could not afford a new one. Maybe it was handed down from someone who could, or picked up from a neighbor's sidewalk with a quiet prayer that it had not seen too much. But the plastic covers, they were a statement. A loud, crinkly one. They told guests, "This is all we have, and we are going to protect it like gold." You were not decorating. You were defending. That plastic was your insurance policy against time, kids, and chance. The air under the plastic was always warmer, damper, and just a little sad. If you were a kid, you hated it. But if you were a parent, you understood. The stains, the spills, the sharp corners of life, they had to bounce off something. The cover was armor for your dignity. Guests would pretend not to notice, but everyone knew what it meant. The plastic turned your living room into a museum. Look, but do not touch. Comfort took a back seat to preservation. You were not lounging. You were preserving history, one suffocating square foot at a time. Because replacing a couch was not an option. Covering it in shiny, suffocating plastic, that was survival. Bugles arrived in 1966, and with them came a whole new shape of snacking. Shaped like tiny trumpets or cones, they were the snack you could eat or wear. Kids popped them onto their fingertips, wiggled their hands like claws, and then crunched them down one by one. But the novelty was not just in the shape. Bugles had a distinct texture, light, crispy, and a little flaky, that made them feel different from chips or pretzels. The corn-based flavor was salty, a little buttery, and oddly addictive. Unlike many snacks of the era, Bugles were not trying to copy something else. They were their own thing. Whether poured into a bowl for a party or packed into a lunchbox for recess, they brought a certain crunchy cheer to any setting. Parents liked that they were baked, not fried. Kids just liked that they were fun. Bugles became a staple of 1960s snack shelves, alongside pretzel rods and Fritos, but they stood out for their playfulness. Even now, decades later, slipping a Bugle onto your finger sparks a flash of childhood. They were silly, satisfying, and one of the few snacks that doubled as a costume. Metal lunchboxes with a thermos were the badge of honor for elementary school survival. If you had one, it probably featured a cartoon character, a band, or a movie you barely knew but still loved. It was dented from being dropped, scratched from being dragged, but it was yours. Inside, There was a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, maybe a bruised apple, and always that little plastic thermos with a twist-off lid. It smelled like old soup and chocolate milk, no matter how often you washed it. Sometimes the latch broke, sometimes the handle cracked, but you kept using it because buying a new one was not an option. You saw other kids with brand new bags, matching lunch gear, maybe even a juice box. You had your box with history, with stickers, with your name scratched on the inside in shaky pen. And it did the job. It kept your lunch safe, your drink sealed, and your spot at the lunch table secured. Because that box was more than metal. It was a daily piece of home. A little reminder of where you came from. And every clank it made walking to the cafeteria, that was the sound of you holding it all together. If even one of these took you straight back to the loud, sticky, sun-faded chaos of growing up in the 1980s, drop your favorite memory in the comments, hit like, and subscribe so we can keep time traveling together, one square slice and glow bracelet at a time.